Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into the life and times of James Madison.
A really central figure.
Absolutely. You probably know him as the father of the Constitution, and that's a huge title, but we want to go deeper than just that today.
For sure. There's a lot more to the story.
Yeah, we'll be looking at the key moments, the big ideas that really, shaped his impact on American democracy. And we're drawing on some great resources you shared from James Madison University, the White House Historical Association, and the Constitution Center.
Good sources. They give a really rounded picture.
So get ready for, hopefully, some surprising insights into Madison's work and why it still matters.
Absolutely. It's easy to see these figures as, like, statues, right? Unchanging. But Madison was very much a product of his time thinking, evolving. And it's fascinating to see how his early life and his education really set the stage for everything that came later.
Okay, so let's start right there, the beginning. James Madison, born March 16, 1751, Belgrove Plantation, Port Conway, Virginia.
Right. And his family background is important. A wealthy planter family, slave owners. He was the oldest of 12 kids.
12. Wow, that's quite a household.
Yeah, definitely position responsibility and privilege, of course. It meant he got a really top-notch early education.
Ages 11 to 16, right? Immersed in subjects like math, geography, Latin.
Exactly. And this wasn't just rote learning. He got really into ancient philosophy. You can sort of see the seeds of his later political thinking being sown right there. Those classical ideas about government, civic virtue.
And he kept going with it. College of New Jersey, that's Princeton now.
Right. Graduated in 1771. But here's something interesting. He didn't just leave. He stayed on. Yeah. Became the college's first graduate student.
That really says something, doesn't it, about his intellectual curiosity?
It really does. That extra study time definitely sharpened his mind, exposed him more to, all those Enlightenment thinkers who were really shaking things up intellectually back then.
So it's like a direct line from the library to the legislature almost.
Pretty much. He put that knowledge into action quickly. By 1774, he's on the Orange County Committee of Public Safety.
Then, 1776, elected to the Virginia legislature. Big year, 1776.
Huge year. And that's where he strikes up that really important friendship with Thomas Jefferson.
Ah, yes, a pivotal relationship.
Absolutely. And you see Madison's commitment to basic rights emerging early on, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, for instance. Madison, still pretty young, argues forcefully that religious freedom isn't a gift from the state.
It's a natural right, inherent.
Exactly, which was quite a radical stance for the time.
And that idea, the free exercise of religion, it really gets cemented later with the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom.
Penned by Jefferson, yeah. But Madison was the one who really pushed it through the Virginia General Assembly. Got it passed in 1786.
Shows real political skill alongside the conviction.
For sure. Those early Virginia years, they were like a training ground, understanding the ideals, but also the practical messiness of politics.
Preparing him for the national stage.
Precisely. Which arrived in 1780. He's sent as a delegate to the Continental Congress.
And get this, he was the youngest delegate there.
Yeah, quite the responsibility.
Yeah.
He served a couple of stints, and it's during this time he really starts to see the problems with the Articles of Confederation, the first attempt at a U.S. government.
What kinds of problems?
Well, he got increasingly frustrated. The central government was just too weak, couldn't enforce things effectively, and he saw state legislatures often just catering to popular whims, not thinking long-term, unstable.
So that dissatisfaction, it was brewing.
Definitely. It became a major motivation for wanting a stronger national structure.
Which brings us then to 1787, Philadelphia, the Constitutional Convention.
And Madison shows up, ready. He'd done his homework, months spent studying governments, history, political theory.
And he presents the Virginia Plan.
Which was honestly revolutionary. It wasn't just fixing the articles. It was a whole new blueprint.
3 branches, legislative, executive, judicial.
Right. Based on popular sovereignty power from the people and acting directly on the people, not just through the states. You really see the influence of thinkers like Montesquieu there with the separation of powers idea.
Yeah, the Virginia Plan outlined a 2-house legislature, a national judiciary, a strong executive.
And Madison's really clever move was designing it with mixed and shared powers, checks and balances, basically, to stop any one branch getting too powerful.
That was pretty innovative for accountability.
It was. But, as you'd expect, the convention floor was full of arguments, compromises.
Especially around representation and slavery.
Hugely divisive. Madison himself saw that the North and South had fundamentally different interests because of their economic systems, particularly slavery.
So how did he try to bridge that gap on representation, I mean?
Well, he proposed a compromise. One house based on population, counting enslaved people, and the other based just on the free population. It was a complicated balancing act.
And that eventually morphed into the Three-Fifths Compromise, right? Article 1, Section 2.
Exactly. Counting 3 out of every 5 enslaved persons for both taxation and representation. It was a compromise, yes, but it undeniably gave the slaveholding states more power.
A really stark reminder of the moral compromises baked into the founding.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But even with all these tough deals, Madison knew the Constitution wasn't just his work. He said it wasn't the offspring of a single brain.
Good quote. Acknowledging the
It's a
collaboration.
vital point. He was influential, no doubt, but it was a group effort, intense debate. And besides shaping it, Madison also basically acted as the secretary, took incredibly detailed notes.
The first historian of the convention, in a way.
You could say that. Those notes are priceless for understanding how it all went down.
Okay, so the Constitution gets drafted, and now it needs to be ratified. Enter the Federalist Papers.
Right. Madison teams up with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, writing essays to persuade people, especially in New York, which was a key state, to adopt the new Constitution.
And these essays are now like foundational texts in American political philosophy.
They really are. Madison wrote 29 of the 85, tackling big ideas, popular sovereignty, the dangers of factions, how the new government was structured.
Federalist number 49, the people are the only legitimate fountain of power. Pretty clear statement.
Very clear. And Federalist number 10 is maybe his most famous, explaining how a large republic with lots of different interests could actually protect liberty.
Because it makes it harder for one group, one faction to dominate.
Exactly. That great line, liberty is to faction what air is to fire. It shows how freedom itself can lead to division, but the structure channels it.
He also wrote Federalist number 54, which tried to justify the Three-Fifths rule.
Yeah, that one's difficult to read today.
Yeah.
It uses the logic of the time, trying to square slavery with Republican ideals. He attributes the argument to Southern brethren, which maybe hints he wasn't entirely comfortable himself.
It's complex. Now, even though he argued in the Federalist Papers that the Constitution's structure was the protection for liberty, he later changed his tune about needing a Bill of Rights.
He did. Initially, he wasn't sold on it. He worried that listing rights might imply that unlisted rights weren't protected.
Like, if it's not on the list, you don't have that right.
Sort of, yeah. A legitimate concern about limiting rights unintentionally. But the public demand was strong. People wanted explicit guarantees. And figures like Jefferson really pushed for it.
So public sentiment and Jefferson kind of persuaded him.
Seems so. He realized it was pretty crucial for building public confidence in this new government.
So he gets elected to the first House of Representatives in 1789.
And he takes the lead, drafts, and introduces the proposed amendments that become the Bill of Rights. June 8th, 1789.
Were his original proposals exactly what we got?
Not entirely. Some ideas didn't make the final cut. He had this idea for a pre-preamble, pulling in ideas from the Declaration of Independence.
Interesting. What else?
He also wanted some guarantees conscience, press, jury trial to apply directly to the states, not just the federal government. That took much, much longer to happen through the courts.
And he wanted a separate article spelling out the separation of powers.
Yeah, a new Article 7. Didn't happen quite like that, but the principle is obviously core. Oh, and his draft of the Second Amendment had a bit about conscientious objectors. That got dropped too.
So the process shaped the final product.
Absolutely. The 10th Amendment about powers reserved to the states or people definitely reflects part of his federalism concept. And he actually wanted to weave the amendments into the Constitution text itself.
Not stick them on the end.
Right. But others worried that would look like they were rewriting the original document. So the separate amendment approach won out.
And eventually, 10 amendments get ratified. December 1791. The Bill of Rights as we know it.
Codifying those fundamental rights. And Madison saw it as vital for public trust, saying it would obtain the confidence of our fellow citizens.
Which it largely did. It helped ease the concerns of the anti-federalists.
Definitely. Crucial for the long-term legitimacy of the government.
Now, around this time, the early 1790s, we see something else emerging political parties. And Madison's right in the thick of it.
Yeah, he's a key founder of the Democratic Republican Party. Which is interesting, right? Because in Federalist number 10, he warned about the dangers of faction.
So, a bit of a shift.
He seemed to come to see parties as maybe unavoidable, a natural result of freedom. He said something like, "No free country has ever been without parties."
An offspring of freedom.
Exactly. He recognized that disagreements over how to interpret and run the government under the Constitution would just naturally lead to different groups forming.
He even helped start a newspaper, the National Gazette.
One of the first real party newspapers. He wrote for it often, arguing politics, criticizing opponents.
It's surprisingly familiar, actually, the partisan media thing.
It really does show how long these patterns have been around in American politics.
Okay, let's move into the 1800s. Madison becomes Secretary of State under President Jefferson, 1801 to 1809.
And a huge event during that time, the Louisiana Purchase. Madison played a critical role in negotiating that deal.
Doubled the size of the U.S., just like that. Enormous implications.
Transformative, geographically, politically, opened up the West. His diplomatic skills were clearly essential there.
Then, 1809, he steps up, becomes the fourth president.
And his presidency gets really defined by rising tensions with Great Britain.
What were the main issues?
Things like impressment, the British forcing American sailors into their navy, seizing American ships, and the British supporting Native American tribes resisting U.S. expansion on the frontier.
All leading towards
the War of 1812, which is a bit ironic, actually. Madison had written before about how war was bad for liberty, how economic pressure like embargoes was better.
And he ended up asking Congress to declare war.
He did. June 1st, 1812. He must have felt there was no other option left.
And that war had some really dramatic moments. The British actually captured and burned Washington, D.C.
August 1814. A major low point for the young country. Must have been terrifying.
But First Lady Dolley Madison famously saved that portrait of George Washington.
Yes. And important government papers, too, showed incredible bravery and quick thinking amidst the chaos.
So, despite setbacks like the burning of Washington, the war eventually ends with the Treaty of Ghent in 1815.
Right. And interestingly, the war seems to have shifted Madison's thinking on some economic stuff, like the National Bank.
He'd been against it before.
Strongly. A states' rights guy on that. But the war showed the practical difficulties of financing a major conflict without a central bank.
So he came around.
He did. Represents a real evolution. In 1816, he actually signed the bill chartering the Second Bank of the United States, acknowledged it was necessary for financial stability.
Pragmatism over prior principles, maybe?
Perhaps. Oh, and another little War of 1812 fact. Madison is the only sitting president to have actually led troops in battle at the Battle of Bladensburg.
Wow, I did not know that. That's quite a detail.
It is. Often overlooked.
So after 2 terms, Madison retires. 1817. Heads back to his estate, Montpelier.
But he doesn't completely disappear from public life. Stays involved.
How so?
Well, he advises Jefferson on founding the University of Virginia, serves on its board, eventually becomes its rector.
Still committed to education and ideas.
Definitely. And in his later years, he was also president of the American Colonization Society.
Right. He remained a respected figure until his death on June 28, 1836.
Leaving behind, as we've discussed, a truly immense legacy. Father of the Constitution. The title fits, given his absolutely central role.
But it's more than just the drafting, isn't it?
Oh, much more. He shaped the Bill of Rights, helped navigate the nation through those really fragile early years. His ideas on democracy, power, checks and balances, we're still debating them today.
Okay, but we absolutely have to talk about a really difficult and, frankly, troubling part of his story, slavery.
Yes, it's crucial. We can't ignore it. Madison was born into a slave-owning family. He inherited over 100 enslaved people at Montpelier.
And he relied on their forced labor his entire life.
He did, including when he was president at the White House.
That contradiction, it's stark. His ideals of liberty versus the reality of him owning people.
It's a fundamental tension, not just in his life, but in the founding of the country. Places like Montpelier, with exhibits like the mere distinction of color and resources from the White House Historical Association, they really help us understand this painful reality, the lives of the people he enslaved.
It forces you to confront that hypocrisy, doesn't it? That the freedom he wrote about wasn't for everyone.
Exactly. The very foundation had this deep injustice built into it.
So wrapping things up, we've traced Madison's intellectual path, his huge role in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, his shifting views on things like banks and the challenges he faced as president.
And we have to hold on to the complexity, the contradictions, especially that stark contrast between liberty and slavery in his own life and work.
His ideas definitely shaped American democracy, but that foundation, it's complicated.
It really is. Which leaves a question for you, the listener. Thinking about all these complexities, how should we view Madison's influence today, especially when we debate government power and individual rights now?
Something to definitely mull over. We really encourage you to check out those resources we mentioned to get an even deeper understanding of this, well, foundational but also very complicated figure.